When the doctor mentioned that confusion and memory loss could be early signs of dementia, I never imagined I'd use that information to uncover the most devastating betrayal of my life. For 6 months, I pretended to lose my mind while my family revealed theirs. What I discovered will shock you, but what I did about it will change everything. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know in the comments what you think about family loyalty. It started 3 weeks after my 68th birthday, sitting in Dr. Rodriguez's office for my annual checkup. Margaret, my daughter, had insisted on coming with me, claiming she was worried about my health. I should have seen the warning signs then, the way she exchanged glances with her husband Tom in the waiting room, the folder of papers she carried, the fake concerned smile she wore like a mask. "Dad's been having some memory issues," Margaret told the doctor before I could even speak. "Forgetting names, losing track of conversations. Sometimes he seems confused about where he is." I stared at her in shock. "Margaret, what are you talking about? I haven't had any." "See? He gets defensive when we try to help," she interrupted, that same patronizing tone she'd used on her children when they were young. "Yesterday he forgot my name for almost 10 minutes. The lie was so bold, so calculated, that I actually felt my jaw drop. Dr. Rodriguez looked between us with growing concern, and I realized this wasn't a spontaneous accusation. This was planned. "Mr. Thompson, have you noticed any changes in your memory or thinking?" the doctor asked gently. "No, I haven't," I said firmly. "My memory is fine. I remember everything perfectly, including conversations that apparently my daughter wants to forget." Margaret's face flushed, but she pressed on. "He's been living alone since Mom died 2 years ago, and Tom and I are worried about his safety. The house is too big for him, and he's isolated out there." Tom nodded earnestly from his chair in the corner. "We've been researching some excellent assisted living facilities. Places where he'd have company, regular meals, medical supervision." The pieces clicked together with sickening clarity. The house. They wanted my house. The beautiful 4-bedroom colonial that my wife Ellen and I had bought 30 years ago. The house we'd raised Margaret in. The house that was now worth over $400,000 in today's market. The house that would be Margaret's inheritance if I died in it. But if I sold it to pay for assisted living, that inheritance would disappear month by month, dollar by dollar. "I see," Dr. Rodriguez said thoughtfully. "Mr. Thompson, I'd like to run some cognitive tests, just to get a baseline. There are several assessments we can do to evaluate memory, attention, and problem-solving skills." As the doctor explained the various tests, I watched Margaret's face. She was trying to look worried, but I caught something else in her expression: anticipation. She wanted me to fail these tests. She needed me to fail them. That's when the idea hit me like a lightning bolt. If Margaret wanted to see cognitive decline, I'd give her cognitive decline. If she wanted a confused, helpless father, she'd get one. But I'd be watching and listening to everything she did when she thought I couldn't understand. The tests took 2 hours. Math problems, word recall, pattern recognition, basic questions about dates and current events. I answered most correctly, but threw in just enough mistakes to seem concerning. I pretended to struggle with some of the easier questions while sailing through harder ones, creating the exact pattern that would suggest early-stage cognitive issues. "Well," Dr. Rodriguez said finally, "there are some areas of concern, but nothing definitive. Memory issues can have many causes: stress, depression, medication side effects, even poor sleep. I'd like to see you again in 3 months for follow-up testing." Margaret's disappointment was barely concealed. "But doctor, shouldn't we be making plans now? I mean, if his condition deteriorates." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," the doctor replied. "Early intervention and monitoring are key. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to give you some information about brain exercises, social activities, things that can help maintain cognitive function." In the car afterward, Margaret was quiet, but Tom couldn't contain himself. "Honey, maybe we should look into getting power of attorney," he said. "You know, just in case things get worse quickly." "Power of attorney for what?" I asked from the back seat, though I already knew the answer. Just to help you, Dad, Margaret said. To make sure your finances are managed properly, that bills get paid, that kind of thing. My finances. Of course. Between my pension, Social Security, and the investments Ellen and I had built over 40 years of marriage, I had nearly $300,000 in savings plus the house. More than enough to last me the rest of my life if managed properly. More than enough to pay for years of expensive assisted living if managed poorly. That evening, alone in my house, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to become the confused, declining old man my daughter apparently needed me to be. But I was also going to document every single thing she said and did when she thought I couldn't understand or remember. I ordered a small digital recorder online and had it delivered to my neighbor's house. I set up hidden cameras in my living room and kitchen, the kind used for home security, motion-activated and nearly invisible. I created a private email account and started a detailed journal of every interaction with Margaret and Tom. Most importantly, I began my performance. The confused father who sometimes forgot names, who needed help with simple tasks, who seemed to drift in and out of awareness. It was easier than I'd expected. All I had to do was act the way Margaret was already telling people I acted. The hardest part was the guilt. Ellen would have been horrified by this deception. But Ellen wasn't here to see what our daughter had become. She wasn't here to watch Margaret systematically manipulate and lie about the man who'd loved and supported her for 35 years. By the end of that first week, I'd already caught Margaret going through my mail when she thought I was napping. I'd recorded Tom taking photos of my financial documents with his phone. I'd watched them both discussing Dad's situation in my kitchen, speaking about me like I was already gone. The betrayal cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced, but it also gave me strength. If Margaret wanted to play games with my mind, she was about to learn that her old father was much sharper than she'd ever imagined. To understand how devastating Margaret's betrayal truly was, you need to know what kind of daughter I'd raised and what kind of father I'd tried to be. For 35 years, I'd been the safety net that caught every one of her falls, the bank that never closed for her emergencies, the grandfather who never missed a birthday or school play. Margaret came into this world fighting, 3 weeks early and demanding attention from her first breath. Ellen used to joke that our daughter could cry louder than a fire truck, and she wasn't wrong. But underneath all that noise was a little girl who wanted everything. The best toys, the prettiest dresses, the biggest birthday parties on the block. She's got champagne taste on a beer budget, Ellen would say with a sigh, watching 4-year-old Margaret demand the expensive doll from the toy store window. I worked overtime for years to give her those things. Double shifts at the construction company, weekend projects, side jobs that kept me away from home but paid for dance lessons and summer camps and the kind of childhood I'd never had. When Margaret wanted to take horseback riding lessons at 12, I picked up extra work for 6 months to afford them. When she needed a car for her 16th birthday, I sold my motorcycle, the one thing I'd bought just for myself, to make the down payment. College was supposed to be her launching pad into independence, but it became another 4 years of financial dependence. Margaret chose an expensive private university 3 states away, majoring in art history, a beautiful subject that led to exactly 0 job offers after graduation. I paid $18,000 a year in tuition, plus room and board, plus spending money, plus spring break trips that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Dad, everyone goes to Cancun for spring break, she'd argued during her junior year. I can't be the only one stuck here. Ellen tried to reason with her. Honey, that money could go toward your student loans. What student loans? Margaret had laughed. Dad's paying for everything. That's what parents do. That's what parents do. At the time, I'd felt proud that I could provide for my daughter so completely. Looking back, I realized I was creating a monster who believed the world owed her everything she wanted. After college, Margaret moved back home temporarily while she figured out her career. Temporarily turned into 2 years of sleeping until noon, going out with friends every night, and treating our house like a hotel with free room service. When Ellen suggested she get a job, any job, to build some responsibility, Margaret would cry about how hard it was to find work in her field, how her degree made her overqualified for retail or restaurant work. "I didn't spend 4 years in college to work at the mall," she'd sob. "You wouldn't want me to waste my education, would you?" I'd hand her another check for her car payment, her credit card bill, her cell phone, her expensive clothes that she needed for job interviews that never seemed to materialize. Ellen warned me I was enabling her, but every time I tried to set boundaries, Margaret would have another crisis that required my immediate financial intervention. Then she met Tom during her temporary stay at home. Tom was 32 to Margaret's 24, recently divorced, and working as a sales manager at a car dealership. He drove expensive cars he couldn't afford, wore suits that cost more than my monthly house payment, and talked constantly about his business opportunities and investment strategies. I didn't trust him from day one. There was something calculating about the way he looked at our house, the way he asked questions about my job and retirement plans, the way he immediately started encouraging Margaret's expensive tastes instead of helping her develop some financial sense. "Tom thinks I should go back to school for my master's degree," Margaret announced 6 months into their relationship. "Art history graduate programs are really competitive, but he thinks I could get into something great. More debt, more years of financial dependence, more delays before Margaret would have to face the real world." But she was so excited, so animated when she talked about her future with Tom, that I couldn't bear to crush her dreams. Graduate school cost me another $35,000 over 2 years. I refinanced the house to pay for it, taking on debt at age 60 that I'd thought I'd never have again. Ellen was furious, but she loved Margaret too much to watch her struggle. "This is the last time," Ellen made me promise. "After graduate school, she's on her own." But there's never really a last time with people like Margaret. After graduate school came the wedding, a $25,000 extravaganza that Tom's family couldn't contribute to because of his father's medical bills and his mother's fixed income. Margaret had her heart set on a specific venue, a specific dress, specific flowers that only bloomed in spring and cost twice what normal arrangements would cost. "This is my one wedding, Dad," she'd pleaded. "I want it to be perfect. I want you to be proud walking me down the aisle." I was proud. Watching my beautiful daughter in her perfect dress, seeing her happiness, felt worth every penny I'd borrowed to make it happen. Even Tom looked like a man who understood how lucky he was, promising to love and cherish the daughter I'd worked so hard to raise. The first few years of their marriage were relatively quiet financially. Tom's sales job was going well, and Margaret got a part-time position at an art gallery that didn't pay much but seemed to satisfy her need for professional fulfillment. They rented a small apartment across town and seemed to be building an independent life together. Then Ellen got sick. Cancer moved through my wife like a wildfire, aggressive and merciless despite every treatment the doctors tried. For 8 months, I watched the love of my life fade away, and Margaret was wonderfully supportive. She drove Ellen to appointments when I couldn't get off work, stayed with her during chemotherapy sessions, helped me navigate the insurance paperwork and medical decisions that seemed to multiply daily. "You don't have to do this alone, Dad," Margaret would say, holding Ellen's hand while I dozed in the uncomfortable hospital chair. "We're family. We take care of each other." During those dark months, I thought I'd raised a daughter who understood love and sacrifice and family loyalty. Margaret seemed to mature before my eyes, becoming the strong, caring woman Ellen and I had always hoped she'd become. But as soon as Ellen died, something changed. It started small. Phone calls asking for help with their car payment because Tom's commission had been lower than expected. Requests for loans to cover their security deposit when they moved to a bigger apartment because their old one held too many sad memories. Gradual increases in their lifestyle that somehow always required my financial assistance to maintain. "We wouldn't ask if we weren't desperate, Dad," became Margaret's standard opening line for every request. Over the 2 years since Ellen's death, I'd given them nearly $40,000. Their rent when Tom missed sales quotas. Credit card payments when Margaret decided she needed new furniture. Car repairs, medical bills, vacation expenses, holiday gifts for Tom's family. There was always something, always an emergency that only I could solve. I never said no because I was grieving and lonely, and helping Margaret made me feel needed. Plus, I'd always helped her before. Why would that change now? But sitting in Dr. Rodriguez's office, Listening to my daughter lie about my mental capacity to justify stealing my independence, I realized that everything had changed. The little girl who demanded the expensive doll had grown into a woman who thought she deserved my entire life. The daughter I'd sacrificed everything for was now ready to sacrifice me for her own convenience and financial gain. As I prepared to begin my performance as a declining old man, I thought about Ellen and wondered what she would want me to do. She'd always been tougher than me when it came to Margaret's manipulation, more willing to say no, more aware of the monster we were creating with our endless generosity. I think Ellen would have wanted me to fight back. I think she would have been proud of what I was about to do. The transformation didn't happen overnight. I had to be subtle, gradual, believable. Over the first month of my decline, I carefully crafted a version of myself that would justify Margaret's eventual actions while giving me access to information I was never supposed to hear. It started with small things. Forgetting Tom's name during dinner and calling him Mark instead. Asking Margaret to repeat stories she'd just told me. Getting confused about what day it was or whether I'd taken my morning medication. I watched Margaret's face during these episodes, and what I saw chilled me to the bone. Not concern, but satisfaction. "Dad, you just asked me that same question 5 minutes ago," she'd say with exaggerated patience, speaking slowly like I was a child. But her eyes weren't worried, they were calculating. Within 2 weeks, Margaret was visiting daily instead of her usual twice-a-week schedule. At first, I thought maybe she was genuinely concerned about my health. Then I realized she was documenting my decline, building a case for her future plans. She'd bring Tom with her most evenings, and they'd sit in my living room speaking about me in the third person while I was right there. "He's getting worse faster than I expected," Margaret told Tom during their second week of daily visits. I was sitting in my recliner, pretending to doze while my hidden camera recorded everything. "Are you sure he's not just having a bad few days?" Tom asked. "Maybe we're rushing into this." "Rushing?" Margaret's voice got sharp. "Tom, he forgot my name yesterday. He asked me 3 times who I was. We can't wait until he burns the house down or forgets to eat for a week." The lies came so easily to her that I almost wondered if she believed them herself. I had never forgotten her name, never asked who she was, never shown any signs of the dramatic decline she was describing to her husband. "What did the lawyer say?" Tom asked, lowering his voice. I kept my breathing steady and my eyes closed, fighting every instinct that wanted me to sit up and demand answers. "He said we need medical documentation of incompetence before we can move forward with power of attorney," Margaret replied. Dr. Rodriguez wasn't helpful, but I found another doctor who specializes in elderly patients. Dr. Chen. He's known for being more realistic about cognitive decline. Meaning what? Meaning he understands that sometimes families need to make difficult decisions quickly, before situations become dangerous. I felt sick listening to my daughter shop for a doctor who would rubber stamp her plans for me. This wasn't about my health or safety. This was about control, about access to my assets, about removing the inconvenience of my independence. Over the following weeks, I perfected my performance while learning the full scope of their betrayal. Margaret had been researching assisted living facilities, not the nice ones with independent apartments and optional services, but memory care units with locked doors and supervised everything. Places that cost $8,000 to $12,000 per month. Places that would burn through my savings in just a few years. Sunset Manor has an immediate opening, Margaret told Tom during one of their kitchen conversations. I was supposed to be napping in my recliner, but my digital recorder was capturing every word from the device I'd hidden behind the coffee canister. "How much?" Tom asked. $11,000 a month, but that includes everything: meals, medication management, 24-hour supervision. Dad's house should sell for at least $400,000, maybe more in this market. Combined with his savings, that's enough for maybe 4 years of care. And after that? After that, it's not our problem. Medicaid takes over, and we're not responsible for his debts. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. They'd already calculated exactly how long my money would last and dismissed what would happen to me afterward. I wasn't their father and family member. I was a financial problem with a limited shelf life. But it got worse. Much worse. During my third week of decline, I overheard Margaret on the phone with someone, discussing details that made my blood run cold. "The key is documenting everything," she said, pacing around my kitchen while I sat at the table, pretending to struggle with a crossword puzzle. "Every confused moment, every forgotten name, every time he seems lost or disoriented. Dr. Chen says he'll need at least 6 documented incidents of significant cognitive impairment before he can recommend supervised care." 6 documented incidents. I'd given her 3 real ones, my carefully performed confusion episodes. She needed 3 more to complete her case against me. That's when I realized Margaret wasn't just waiting for my decline. She was actively working to create it. The next day, she brought me lunch and pills I'd never seen before. "Dr. Rodriguez prescribed these for your memory, Dad," she said, setting a glass of water next to 2 small white tablets. "They should help with the confusion." I palmed the pills instead of swallowing them and flushed them down the toilet later. A quick internet search revealed they weren't memory medications. They were anti-anxiety drugs that could cause drowsiness, confusion, and disorientation in elderly patients, especially when combined with other medications or alcohol. Margaret was drugging me. My own daughter was poisoning me to create the symptoms she needed to justify taking control of my life. For the next month, I pretended to take her memory pills while secretly documenting everything. The pills, the false medical claims, the conversations with lawyers and doctors, the property assessments of my house that she thought I was too confused to notice. I also started varying my performance, giving Margaret exactly what she needed to build her case. Some days I was sharp and normal, which frustrated her. Other days I played up the confusion, forgot important details, seemed lost in my own home. I could see her taking notes on her phone after each incident, building her evidence file. The breakthrough came during my 5th week of pretending. Margaret brought Dr. Chen to my house for an informal consultation, thinking I was too impaired to understand what was really happening. Dr. Chen was everything I'd expected, a thin, nervous man who spoke more to Margaret than to me, asking leading questions designed to confirm rather than assess. "Mr. Thompson, what year is it?" he asked. I pretended to think hard. 1987? No, that's not right. 1995. It's 2023, Dad, Margaret said with fake patience. "We talked about this yesterday." "And who is this young lady?" Dr. Chen asked, gesturing to Margaret. That's. I let my face go blank, looking at my daughter like I'd never seen her before. "I'm sorry, I don't remember." The hurt that flashed across Margaret's face almost broke my resolve. For just a moment, she looked like the little girl who used to run to me when she scraped her knee, who trusted me to fix everything that went wrong in her world. But the moment passed, replaced by that calculating look I'd learned to recognize. "This is quite advanced for someone his age," Dr. Chen murmured to Margaret. "Usually, we see this level of decline in patients who've been symptomatic for several years." "It's been getting worse very quickly," Margaret replied. "Some days he doesn't recognize me at all. Yesterday he called me Ellen. That was my mother's name." Another lie. I'd never called her Ellen, never failed to recognize her. But Dr. Chen nodded sympathetically and made notes in his file. "I think we need to seriously consider supervised care," he said. "Living alone is becoming dangerous for him, and the progression suggests we shouldn't wait much longer." After they left, I sat in my empty house and cried for the first time since Ellen's funeral. Not for myself, but for the daughter I'd lost. Somewhere along the way, the little girl I'd loved and sacrificed for had become someone I didn't recognize, someone capable of destroying her own father for money. But my tears didn't last long. Margaret had made her choice, and now I had to make mine. That evening, I called my real doctor, not Dr. Chen, but Dr. Rodriguez, who'd known me for 15 years. "Doctor, I need to schedule a complete cognitive assessment," I said. "The real kind, with multiple tests and a second opinion." "Mr. Thompson, is everything all right? Your daughter seemed quite concerned when you were here last month." "That's exactly what I want to discuss with you," I replied. "I think there are some things you need to know about my daughter's concerns." I scheduled the appointment for the following week and spent the next few days planning my next move. Margaret thought she was dealing with a confused, helpless old man who couldn't understand what was happening to him. She was about to learn how wrong she was. During my last week of confusion, I gathered every piece of evidence I'd collected. The recordings of Margaret's phone calls with lawyers and doctors. The photos of her going through my mail and financial documents. The pills she'd been giving me, which I'd saved in a labeled container. The list of memory care facilities she'd researched, complete with costs and waiting lists. I also made some calls of my own. To my real lawyer, the one Margaret didn't know about. To my bank, to discuss account security and power of attorney protections. To a private investigator who specialized in elder abuse cases. Margaret had spent 6 weeks building a case against my mental competence. I'd spent 6 weeks building a case against her character. The difference was that my evidence was real. On the day before my appointment with Dr. Rodriguez, Margaret came for her usual evening visit. She seemed more relaxed than she'd been in weeks, probably because her plan was finally coming together. "Dad, I've been thinking," she said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table. "Maybe it's time we looked at some living situations that might be better for you. Places where you'd have more help, more social interaction." "What kind of places?" I asked, maintaining my confused act. "Just facilities for people who need a little extra care. You wouldn't have to worry about cooking or cleaning or remembering to take your medications. Everything would be taken care of for you." "Would you visit me?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. "Of course, Dad. Of course I'd visit." But her eyes said something different. Her eyes said that once I was locked away in memory care, once my house was sold and my accounts were under her control, my usefulness to her would be over. "That sounds nice," I said, letting my voice waver like an old man who was grateful for his daughter's concern. Margaret smiled and patted my hand. "I'm going to take care of everything, Dad. You don't need to worry about anything anymore." As I watched her gather her purse and keys, already mentally spending my money, I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in weeks. Tomorrow, the performance would end. Tomorrow, Margaret would discover that her confused old father had been several steps ahead of her the entire time. "Margaret," I called as she reached the door. "Yes, Dad. Thank you for taking such good care of me." Her smile was radiant, full of false love and real greed. "You're welcome, Dad. Sweet dreams." After she left, I sat in my quiet house and prepared for the conversation that would change both our lives forever. Margaret had taught me that family loyalty was conditional, that love could be faked, that trust was just another tool for manipulation. Tomorrow, I was going to teach her that consequences were real. The morning of my appointment with Dr. Rodriguez arrived bright and clear, like the universe was providing perfect lighting for the performance of my lifetime. Margaret had offered to drive me, but I'd insisted I could manage on my own. After all, I was having one of my good days. I arrived at the medical center 30 minutes early, carrying a briefcase that Margaret had never seen before. Inside were 6 weeks of evidence that would destroy every lie she'd built around my supposed decline. Dr. Rodriguez greeted me in his office with the professional warmth I'd come to appreciate over our 15-year relationship. "Robert, you look well today," he said, settling behind his desk. "Your daughter mentioned you wanted some additional cognitive testing." "I did," I replied, setting my briefcase on my lap. "But first, there are some things you need to know about my daughter's concerns." For the next hour, I laid out everything. I played recordings of Margaret discussing my symptoms that had never occurred. I showed him photos of her searching through my financial documents. I produced the pills she'd been giving me, which he immediately identified as medications that would indeed cause confusion and disorientation in elderly patients. Dr. Rodriguez's expression grew increasingly grave as the evidence mounted. "Robert, what you're describing, this is elder abuse. Financial and medical exploitation. We need to report this immediately." "Not yet," I said. "I want to handle this my way first. I want Margaret to understand exactly what she's done and what it's going to cost her." "Are you certain? The authorities could." "Doctor, I've been taking care of myself for 68 years. I can handle one more family crisis. He ran the complete cognitive assessment, memory tests, problem-solving exercises, attention and focus evaluations. I answered every question correctly, solved every puzzle, demonstrated the mental acuity of someone decades younger than my actual age. Your cognitive function is outstanding, Robert, Dr. Rodriguez said, reviewing the results. There's absolutely no indication of dementia, memory impairment, or any other condition that would affect your capacity to make decisions or live independently. I'll need that in writing, I said. Official documentation of my mental competence, signed and dated. Of course. But Robert, you understand that this medical evaluation contradicts everything your daughter has been telling people about your condition. Yes, I replied. That's exactly the point. Armed with official proof of my mental competence, I drove home to prepare for Margaret's evening visit. But this time, I had a few surprise guests waiting to join our conversation. At 6 p.m. sharp, Margaret arrived with Tom, both of them wearing the fake concerned expressions they'd perfected over the past 6 weeks. "Hi, Dad," Margaret said, kissing my cheek. "How was your doctor's appointment? Did they do those tests we talked about?" "Oh yes," I replied, settling into my recliner. "Very thorough tests. Would you like to hear the results?" "Of course," Tom said, sitting forward eagerly. "What did the doctor say?" Instead of answering, I picked up my phone and made a call. "Yes, they're here now," I said into the phone. "Please come in." Margaret and Tom exchanged confused glances as my front door opened and 3 people entered my living room. My real lawyer, James Morrison, Dr. Rodriguez, and Detective Sarah Chen from the Elder Abuse Unit of the local police department. Margaret's face went white. "Dad, what's going on? Who are these people?" "These are the people who are going to help us have an honest conversation for the first time in 6 weeks," I said, standing up with more energy than I'd shown in months. Detective Chen stepped forward, showing her badge. "Ms. Flores, I'm Detective Chen. We need to discuss some serious allegations regarding your father's care." "Allegations?" Margaret's voice cracked. "I don't understand. Dad, what have you told them?" "Everything," I said simply. "Every lie you've told about my mental condition. Every pill you've given me to create confusion. Every conversation you've had about stealing my house and putting me in memory care. Every plan you've made to rob me of my independence and my assets." The room fell silent except for Tom's sharp intake of breath. I don't know what you think you heard," Margaret stammered. "But Dad, you've been so confused lately. Sometimes you imagine things that didn't happen." Dr. Rodriguez spoke up. "Ms. Flores, I examined your father this morning. Comprehensive cognitive testing shows absolutely no signs of dementia, memory impairment, or any condition that would affect his mental capacity. His cognitive function is actually exceptional for his age." "But that's impossible," Margaret protested. "He's been forgetting things constantly, getting confused about basic facts." "No," I interrupted, my voice stronger than it had been in weeks. "I've been pretending to forget things while you've been pretending to care about me." I walked to my entertainment center and pulled out my digital recorder, setting it on the coffee table between us. "Would you like to hear yourself discussing how quickly you could burn through my life savings? Or perhaps the conversation where you calculated exactly how long my money would last in memory care?" Margaret's face crumpled as I pressed play. Her own voice filled the room, discussing my inevitable decline and her plans for my assets like I was already dead. "Dad's house should sell for at least $400,000, maybe more in this market. Combined with his savings, that's enough for maybe 4 years of care. And after that, it's not our problem." Tom put his head in his hands as Margaret sank onto my couch. All pretense finally dropped. "Margaret," I said, looking at my daughter with a mixture of sadness and disgust. "Did you really think you could drug me into compliance? Did you honestly believe you could lie to doctors and lawyers and steal my life without any consequences?" "I wasn't trying to hurt you," she whispered. I thought it would be better for you to be somewhere safe." "Safe?" Detective Chen interjected. Ms. Flores, you've been administering unprescribed medications to your father to create symptoms of cognitive decline. That's assault. You've been making false statements to medical professionals about his mental capacity. That's fraud. You've been attempting to gain control of his assets through deception. That's financial exploitation. The legal terms hit Margaret like physical blows. Each charge was another nail in the coffin of her perfect plan. I want all of you to understand something, I said, addressing Margaret and Tom directly. For 6 weeks, you've treated me like I was already gone. You've spoken about me like I was a problem to be solved, a burden to be managed, an inconvenience standing between you and my money. I pulled out a folder from my briefcase and set it on the table. These are copies of everything I've documented. The recordings, the photographs, the medical evidence of your attempted drugging, the research you've done on memory care facilities, the consultations with lawyers about power of attorney. Margaret was crying now, but I felt no sympathy for her tears. You have a choice to make right now, I continued. You can face the criminal charges Detective Chen is prepared to file: assault, fraud, attempted financial exploitation, conspiracy. Or you can accept the consequences I'm prepared to offer instead. What consequences? Tom asked quietly. Complete and permanent estrangement from my life, I said. No more phone calls, no more visits, no more financial help, no more family relationship of any kind. You wanted to put me away so you could forget about me? Congratulations. Now I'm going to forget about you. Margaret looked up at me with red, swollen eyes. Dad, please. You can't just cut us out of your life. I'm your daughter. You were my daughter, I replied. But daughters don't drug their fathers. Daughters don't lie to doctors to steal their parents' independence. Daughters don't calculate how quickly they can spend their father's life savings. I turned to Detective Chen. I want restraining orders filed immediately. Neither of them is allowed on my property or to contact me in any way. Dad, you can't do this, Margaret pleaded. What about family? What about forgiveness? What about the family loyalty you showed me for the past 6 weeks? I shot back. What about the forgiveness you planned to show me when you had me locked away in memory care? James Morrison, my lawyer, stepped forward with a stack of papers. Mr. Thompson's will has been updated, he announced. Ms. Flores and her husband have been removed as beneficiaries. The estate will be donated to the Alzheimer's Association and the Elder Abuse Prevention Society upon Mr. Thompson's death. The final blow landed with devastating precision. Margaret's inheritance, the money she'd schemed and lied and drugged me to access, was gone forever. You have 10 minutes to leave my house, I said. After that, Detective Chen will arrest you for trespassing. As Margaret and Tom gathered their things with shaking hands, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. They'd wanted to take everything from me. My home, my independence, my dignity, my freedom. Instead, they'd lost everything themselves. Their inheritance, their family, their future. Justice, I realized, sometimes required the patience to let people reveal exactly who they really were. The 10 minutes passed in complete silence. Margaret and Tom gathered their belongings like criminals fleeing a crime scene, which, I suppose, they were. At the door, Margaret turned back one last time, her face streaked with tears and mascara. Dad, please, think about what you're doing. I'm all the family you have left. No, I replied quietly. You're all the family I had left. There's a difference. After they left, I sat with Detective Chen, Dr. Rodriguez, and James Morrison to finalize the legal protections I'd need going forward. The restraining orders were just the beginning. Robert, I have to ask, Detective Chen said, reviewing her notes. Why didn't you come to us immediately when you realized what was happening? Because I needed to know how far she would go, I replied. I needed to understand whether this was a moment of weakness or a calculated plan to destroy my life. The answer was clear after 6 weeks. James Morrison pulled out additional paperwork from his briefcase. We've also prepared a comprehensive power of attorney document that specifically excludes Margaret and Tom from any decision-making authority, even in emergency situations. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, has agreed to serve as your emergency contact. Mrs. Patterson was a retired nurse who lived next door, someone I'd known and trusted for over a decade. Unlike my daughter, she'd never once asked me for money or tried to convince me I was incapable of caring for myself. We're also establishing a medical advocate directive, Dr. Rodriguez added. This ensures that only physicians you've specifically approved can make assessments about your mental capacity. No more surprise consultations with doctors like Chen. Over the following weeks, I implemented a complete security overhaul of my life. I changed all my locks and installed a proper security system with cameras that I controlled, not hidden devices for gathering evidence. I moved my financial accounts to a new bank where Margaret had no information or contacts. I established credit monitoring to prevent any attempts at identity theft or fraudulent account access. Most importantly, I began rebuilding the social connections that I'd neglected during my marriage to Ellen and that Margaret had tried to isolate me from during her manipulation campaign. I joined a senior hiking group that met twice weekly for walks through local nature trails. I volunteered at the community center, helping with their financial literacy classes for young families. I reconnected with old friends from my construction days, men I'd lost touch with over the years but who welcomed me back with genuine warmth. "Bob, where have you been hiding?" asked Frank Mueller, my former supervisor, when I showed up at our monthly retirees breakfast. "We thought you'd disappeared after Ellen passed." "I got caught up in some family drama," I replied. "But that's resolved now." The hiking group became my anchor. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, I'd meet 12 other seniors at different trailheads around the area. We'd walk for 2 hours, discussing everything from politics to grandchildren to health challenges, and I'd never once felt judged or diminished or treated like a burden. "You know, Bob," said Helen Martinez during one of our walks, "you seem different from when you first joined. More relaxed, maybe." "I got rid of some stress in my life," I told her. "Amazing how much better you feel when you stop carrying other people's problems." 3 months after cutting Margaret and Tom out of my life, I received a letter from a law firm I didn't recognize. Margaret was contesting my will and the restraining orders, claiming I'd been mentally compromised when I made those decisions. I called James Morrison immediately. "I was expecting this," he said when I read him the letter. "They're arguing that your dementia symptoms from last spring prove you weren't competent to make major legal decisions. Do they have a case?" "Not with the evidence we have. Dr. Rodriguez's comprehensive evaluation clearly shows your mental competence, and we have recordings of Margaret discussing her fake documentation of your decline. They're basing their case on lies they told, which we can prove were lies." The legal battle lasted 4 months and cost Margaret and Tom every penny they had saved. They hired expensive lawyers who specialized in elder law, convinced they could prove I'd been manipulated or coerced into changing my will. But lies are fragile things, and their case crumbled under scrutiny. During the deposition, Margaret's lawyer played the recordings of our family dinners where I'd seemed confused and disoriented. These recordings clearly show my client's father exhibiting signs of severe cognitive decline, the lawyer argued. James Morrison smiled and produced our own recordings, the ones I'd made of Margaret and Tom discussing my symptoms that they knew were fake. "Your Honor, here is Margaret Flores discussing how she needed to create 6 documented incidents of cognitive impairment to justify supervised care for her father. She specifically mentions that some of his confusion episodes were performed for her benefit." The judge's expression grew stern as she listened to Margaret's voice describing her plan to manipulate my medical treatment. "This court finds no evidence that Mr. Thompson was mentally compromised when he made his legal decisions," the judge ruled. "In fact, the evidence suggests that Ms. Flores deliberately attempted to create the appearance of mental decline for her own financial benefit. The will stands as written, and the restraining orders remain in effect." Margaret's lawyer requested permission to speak with me directly, hoping to negotiate some kind of settlement. "My client realizes she made mistakes," he said during a conference call with James Morrison. "She's prepared to apologize and accept a reduced inheritance in exchange for Mr. Thompson dropping the restraining orders." "Tell your client that mistakes are accidents," I replied. "What she did was a calculated campaign to steal my life." There will be no negotiation, no settlement, and no reconciliation. 6 months after the court ruling, I heard through Mrs. Patterson that Margaret and Tom had been forced to sell their house to pay their legal bills. They'd moved to a small apartment across town and Tom had taken a second job to cover their expenses. She came by asking about you, Mrs. Patterson told me during one of our weekly coffee visits. Wanted to know if you were okay, if you needed anything. What did you tell her? I told her you were thriving, Mrs. Patterson replied with a smile. Which is true. You look better now than you have since Ellen passed. It was true. At 69, I felt younger and more energetic than I had in years. Without the constant stress of Margaret's financial crises and emotional manipulation, I'd lost weight, started exercising regularly, and rediscovered interests I'd abandoned during my years of being her personal bank. I'd taken up woodworking again, building birdhouses and small furniture pieces in my garage workshop. I'd started reading voraciously, working through the classic novels I'd always meant to read but never had time for. I'd even begun dating occasionally, nothing serious, just dinner companionship with women I'd met through my hiking group or volunteer work. You should write a book about all this, suggested Carol Waters, a retired teacher I'd been seeing casually. Other people need to know that elder abuse doesn't always look like physical violence. Sometimes it looks like a concerned daughter who just wants to help. The idea intrigued me. How many other elderly people were being manipulated by family members who disguised greed as concern? How many sons and daughters were building cases for incompetence based on fabricated symptoms and manufactured crises? I began researching elder abuse statistics and was horrified by what I found. Financial exploitation by family members was one of the fastest-growing crimes in America, with children and grandchildren stealing billions of dollars annually from their elderly relatives. Most cases went unreported because victims were ashamed or afraid of losing their families entirely. I started speaking at community centers and senior groups about recognizing the warning signs of family manipulation. My presentations were always packed, and the questions afterward revealed how common these situations really were. My son keeps pressuring me to add his name to my bank accounts, one elderly woman told me after a presentation. He says it's just for emergencies, but I'm starting to worry. Trust your instincts, I advised her. If someone who truly cared about your welfare wanted to help with emergencies, they'd help you set up proper legal protections, not gain access to your money. A year after Margaret's failed legal challenge, I established the Ellen Thompson Foundation for Elder Protection, funded with the money I'd originally planned to leave as her inheritance. The foundation provided legal assistance to elderly people facing family exploitation and education programs to help seniors protect themselves from manipulation. During the foundation's first year, we helped 43 families dealing with financial abuse from relatives. In every case, the pattern was the same. Adult children creating crises that only parental money could solve, gradually escalating demands that normalized the idea of complete financial dependence, followed by claims that the elderly parent was too confused or incompetent to manage their own affairs. What you survived is actually quite common, explained Dr. Patricia Williams, a gerontologist who joined our advisory board. Adult children who've never learned financial independence often view their parents' assets as an extension of their own resources. When parents try to establish boundaries, the children escalate to more extreme control measures. Like fake dementia symptoms. Exactly. It's easier to take someone's independence if you can convince everyone, including the victim, that they're not capable of independence anymore. 2 years after cutting Margaret out of my life, I received an unexpected phone call from Tom. Margaret was in the hospital with complications from diabetes, and he wanted me to know in case I wanted to visit. She's been asking for you, Tom said quietly. She knows she can't undo what happened, but she wants to apologize before it's too late. I thought about it for 3 days. Ellen would have wanted me to forgive our daughter, to find some way to reconcile before she died. The hiking group was split when I asked for their advice. Some felt family was family, others believed some betrayals were unforgivable. In the end, I chose a middle path. I wrote Margaret a letter instead of visiting. In it, I explained that while I forgave her for my own peace of mind, forgiveness didn't mean reconciliation. She'd shown me who she really was when she thought I couldn't understand or remember, and that person wasn't someone I could trust with access to my life. I hope you recover completely, I wrote. I hope you build a good life with Tom based on your own efforts rather than other people's money. But that life will be separate from mine. You taught me that family loyalty is conditional, and I learned the lesson well. Tom called to tell me she'd read the letter and cried for hours, but also that she'd finally accepted responsibility for what she'd done. She knows she destroyed something that can't be fixed, he said. She wanted me to tell you that she's sorry for the daughter she became and for the father she tried to take away from you. Margaret died 3 weeks later from complications that might have been treatable if they'd had better insurance or more money for specialists. I didn't attend the funeral, but I sent flowers with a card that read, "For the little girl who used to run to me with scraped knees. She deserved a better ending." 5 years have passed since I pretended to have dementia to uncover my daughter's betrayal. I'm now 73 years old, and my life is fuller than it's been since Ellen died. The Ellen Thompson Foundation has helped over 200 families protect themselves from elder abuse, and I've become something of an accidental expert on family financial manipulation. Last month, I received an invitation to speak at a national conference on elder rights. The audience of 500 social workers, lawyers, and advocates gave me a standing ovation when I finished telling my story. Mr. Thompson, a social worker asked during the Q&A session, "Do you ever regret the choice you made to cut your daughter out of your life?" "I regret that she made it necessary," I replied. "But I don't regret protecting myself from someone who was willing to destroy my independence for their own convenience." My hiking group has become my chosen family. We celebrate birthdays together, support each other through health scares, and share holidays with the warmth that Margaret and Tom never provided. Helen Martinez, who asked about my changed demeanor years ago, has become my closest companion, not romantically, but as the kind of friend who remembers your medication schedule and brings soup when you're sick. "You know what I admire most about your story," she told me recently. "You didn't just survive what happened. You used it to help other people." The foundation continues to grow. We've partnered with banks to train tellers to recognize signs of financial elder abuse. We've worked with doctors to develop protocols for independently verifying cognitive decline claims. We've created educational materials that help seniors understand the difference between genuine concern and manipulative control. Most importantly, we've shown hundreds of elderly people that they have the right to say no to family members who treat them like ATMs with legs. Mrs. Patterson, my neighbor who became my emergency contact, often jokes that I'm the most independent 73-year-old she knows. "You're busier now than some people half your age," she said last week, watching me load camping gear into my truck for a weekend hiking trip. "Margaret thought putting you in memory care would be doing you a favor. Instead, you're more active than you've ever been." It's true. Without the constant drain of Margaret's financial crises and emotional manipulation, I've rediscovered the energy and optimism I thought I'd lost with Ellen. I travel regularly with my hiking group, volunteer at 3 different organizations, and maintain a social calendar that sometimes feels overwhelming. I've also started dating more seriously. Carol Waters and I have been seeing each other exclusively for the past year, and while we're not ready for marriage, we enjoy each other's company immensely. She lost her husband to cancer 5 years ago and understands both grief and the importance of building new happiness. "You're proof that it's never too late to start over," she told me on my 73rd birthday. "You could have spent these years being bitter about what Margaret did. Instead, you've spent them becoming the person you were always supposed to be." Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd confronted Margaret directly instead of pretending to decline. Would she have admitted her plans? Would she have apologized and changed course? Or would she have simply become more careful about hiding her manipulation? I'll never know, but I'm glad I chose the path I did. By pretending to be the confused old man she wanted me to be, I learned exactly who my daughter had become when she thought no one was watching. That knowledge was devastating but also liberating. The little girl who used to demand expensive dolls had grown into a woman who demanded her father's entire life. The daughter I'd sacrificed everything for was willing to sacrifice me for her own convenience. Those truths were painful to accept, but they were also the key to my freedom. Ellen would be proud of the man I've become in the aftermath of betrayal. She'd love the foundation we created in her name, the lives we've helped protect, the community we've built around honesty and genuine care. Most of all, she'd be glad that I finally learned the lesson she tried to teach me for years. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is stop enabling someone to hurt you. At 73, I'm healthier, happier, and more purposeful than I've been in decades. I have real friends who care about my well-being without ulterior motives. I have meaningful work that helps others avoid the pain I experienced. I have a future filled with possibilities instead of obligations. Margaret wanted to take everything from me. My independence, my home, my dignity, my freedom. Instead, her betrayal gave me the greatest gift of all. The knowledge that I was stronger than she ever imagined, and the courage to build a life worthy of that strength. If you've enjoyed this story, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you experienced family manipulation? How did you handle it? Your stories matter, and sharing them helps others recognize that they're not alone in facing these difficult situations.